Hey everyone, this is Eric Bond. I'm one of the co-founders of Hustle Fund. We're a pre-seed stage fund based in the San Francisco Bay Area and Singapore. And welcome to today's session, which is called Driving Revenue Through Retention. So those might be the four unsexiest words I've ever said, driving revenue through retention. But what you're going to discover in the course of today's session is that retention is indeed sexy. Because where you make your money is actually from the renewal conversations, those retention conversations that are hopefully no-brainers with your clients that will turn into a consistent income and revenue for your team and company for many, many years. So before we get into introducing, I guess, the content for today and today's speaker, Elizabeth, by the way, we're very lucky because I'm going to shut up very soon and have my awesome co-founder speak. She is an expert on this subject and you'll enjoy her much more. But before that, I wanted to first call out that we can't put together this event today without an important partner, which is NetSuite, who is co-sponsoring today's event. So a little bit about NetSuite. NetSuite gives companies real-time visibility into financial and consumer data that's crucial for improving customer retention and overall business health. On a single cloud-based platform, NetSuite offers 360-degree financial visibility, improved revenue recognition capabilities, key insights into consumer behavior, and more, so you can clearly identify why customers are returning to your brand and build on the strategies that are driving success. With pre-configured KPIs and value-driven dashboards for daily and strategic needs, NetSuite gives every early stage company like you the visibility and control to stay resilient and drive customer retention. So I'm happy to report that we have a very large portfolio of companies here at Hustle Fund, and many of our founders are happy NetSuite customers. So I encourage you to check out netsuite.com. And thank you again, NetSuite, for allowing us to put this together. So before we hand it over to Elizabeth to introduce the agenda, I just wanted to make a quick mechanical note that this is a Zoom conference today. Zoom is a web video hosting platform that you may have heard of before, a little mom and pop business. And hopefully you guys are familiar with some of the mechanics of how Zoom works. We're going to be focusing your questions on the Q&A box, which I think is one of the little buttons on the bottom right of your view right now. So if you have a question at any time, please go ahead and submit it there. More so than the chat. We're not going to be able to monitor the chat as well. At the end of today's session, we're going to have time reserved for Q&A to answer your questions. And our awesome head of marketing, Kara, is also available today to help to lead that section. And we'll try to get through as many of your questions as possible. Okay, so I think I've done enough talking. It's my pleasure to hand it over to my D-list celebrity friend and co-founder, Elizabeth, to introduce today's session. Here you go, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Eric. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. And I know that many of you are coming from many places, so thanks for staying up late or getting up super early. We'll just hop right into it. And so what are we going to cover today? Well, I think, at a high level, I think it is so very important for companies to be able to track and retain their customers because at the end of the day, that's what business is all about. It's not about relying on money from investors or other folks. It's about trying to see if you can build a business through customers who love you and continue to stay with you. And so what I want to cover today is, well, first, like, why should you even listen to me? Like, why am I somewhat qualified to talk about this? And why should you care about retention? What is it? Retention is such a broad topic. We could talk about retention for 10 years and continue talking. So the focus for today's talk is going to be on measurement specifically, like how do you actually measure retention? And then we'll dive into the weeds of specific techniques, including cohort analyses and some examples. And then I just want to open it up to Q&A. Kind of per a lot of our talks that we do, we know that many of you have a lot of questions that may or may not pertain to your particular situation. And I think that we want to start at a high level and make sure everyone's on the same page and baseline the basic information, but then be able to be helpful to you as you think through some of the retention questions that you're thinking about with your business and decisions that you need to make. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. Cool. So quick background on myself. I think many of you know me as a somewhat VC, but I think in a past life, I was not a VC at all. In fact, I didn't do anything in the finance world. In fact, I'm a marketer by training. So I studied engineering, electrical engineering, and afterwards I went to do marketing actually at a hardware software company called National Instruments. And then I later was a marketer at Google. And through those experiences, I actually had no idea what marketing was, because frankly speaking, when you're one of those companies, you don't need any marketing. Everybody wants to write about Google. Google doesn't need to really worry about that. But when I went to start my own company, LaunchBit, that's when I really needed to learn marketing super well, because nobody would just show up at your door and start buying stuff. And my company LaunchBit was effectively an ad tech company. And so our customers were also marketers. So over the years, I've learned a lot about specific strategies people have used, whether it's at big companies or small companies. I think my most valuable learnings were from those small companies, because those are the ones who needed to make marketing count. And I'm going to talk today about many of those learnings throughout the last, 15 years or so. So let's move on and dig into the meat of this. So first off, why should you care about retention? What exactly is this? And this is a bit of a rhetorical question. Maybe if you want to move to the chat, I do have the chat window open. If you want to just actually type in, like, why should you care about retention in one sentence, we'll just respect that for a minute and talk about that. Actually, Carrie, do you want to move back one slide real quick while people are typing? Anybody want to chat? Okay, well, I'll go ahead and answer this question. Oh, perfect. Oh, here come in all the responses all at once. I guess there was just a delay. And I think everybody is kind of saying more or less the same thing. It's easy to retain a customer who already loves you. Like, it's so hard to get somebody to part with their money, but once they do, if they stay with you, they can be really profitable. That's what Chris says. You can have more predictability in your revenue. That's what Adam's saying. Okay, there are a lot of responses here, but basically it's a lot easier once you have a customer to get people to continue paying money with you than it is to try to get a new customer. And retention really is the ability to drive your existing customers to continue buying. Now, I just want to do a quick definition here that you may already know, which is churn. And that is essentially the opposite of that, which is the rate at which customers stop buying from you. And that's going to be really important. Those two things are two sides of the same coin. So let's move on to the next slide to really show how this actually plays out. And that is, let's just take a hypothetical company. I think people don't fully understand until you look at this graph how important retention is. If you take a company, let's say we start a company and we make $2,000 every month. So just new $2,000 that recurs. So we're building on top of money that we have made before. And so we bring in a new customer, brings in $2,000 of new recurring monthly revenue every month. But there is churn. People don't stay with you forever. If you were to graph that out, this is the graph that you would get. And big props to ProfitWell for putting this on their blog. I thought that this graph was nicely done. You can see that actually churn here makes a big difference, where if you have 5% churn, you can see that your business really, you're just constantly trying to replace all the people who are leaving. But if you just have a little bit less churn, and if you're actually upselling, you can see that you can start to get some scale on this business. So in other words, the churn alone, like never mind the revenue, the churn alone, your ability to keep your existing customers coming back and paying, matters a lot for how much money you will make. And if you look at the timeline on this, it even shows up on relatively short timescales. In the first year, maybe it doesn't really show up, but certainly if you look at 2018 on this chart, there's a big difference between the top line and the bottom line. And it only goes up from there. So retention is really important. All right, let's move on. Now, I think one of the challenges with retention is that people tend to look at retention in very broad swaths that are not specific enough. And as such, people are not able to do a deep dive into how to improve your retention. So I like to think of marketing as really building a system. Some of you may have heard me use the word marketing machine. Like, that is what I think we all aspire to do. We all aspire to build a system that is effectively a marketing machine where there are some inputs and then there's some outputs, and hopefully it's repeatable, where the outputs, of course, are better than the inputs. Like, if you put in $1, can you get $1 out? Can you do that relatively quickly? Can you rinse and repeat that machine? And while you're building this machine, it's really important to know, like, how can I debug this machine? Especially in the beginning, you're not going to be able to get it right. And even once you kind of get something working, like being able to put in $1 and get $1 out, you want to optimize it so that way you can get $2 out, $3 out, etc. And you have to really know how to go into this quote machine and debug it. So I would really actually kind of adopt a little bit of an engineering mindset here, which is like, how are we going to improve our retention? And I think this is kind of the key piece that a lot of people who don't have marketing backgrounds don't think about or don't know how to think about. And frankly speaking, there are not a lot of materials on the web on how to think about this. So that's what we're really going to do a deeper dive into here. So next slide, please. So right now, I want to talk about a technique called cohort analysis that will help you figure out if you are getting better or worse. And I'd say that, there are many different ways that you can slice and dice, let's just call it your marketing machine. I think the two most important dimensions to think about slicing and dicing, let's just call it your customer data. One is by customer acquisition channel, which is, like, how do customers differ based on ad channels versus SEO versus, other ways that they can come in to your website. But the other dimension that I think is equally important to slice and dice by, and that's what we're going to be focusing on here, is by time. If you were to segment your customers by who came in January versus who came in February versus who came in March, and how their behavior occurs across the year, you may see differences, or you should see differences. And if you are getting better, what you will see is that the people who came in January, they may not have great behavior. They may not be very engaged. They may not be spending very much money. They may be leaving your service. But then hopefully, if you're improving your product or your service, or improving the messaging, or whatever it is, the group that came in February or March, hopefully you see better behavior from them. They're spending more. They are staying longer. They're more engaged with your product. They love you more, etc. And so that's really what you want to understand. Are you getting better or worse? And if we look at it from this dimension of time, cohort analysis is a great way to do that. So here you see basically a graph. This is what cohort analysis is. And if we were to look at it from the lens that I just described, where you can see in this hypothetical example, and thank you to Visible for this graph, people who came in, the 37 customers who became customers in Q1 in 2017, in Q1, of course, by definition, which was, when they came in and became a customer, 100% of them were retained. And that makes sense. That's when they came in and became a customer. But in Q2, how many of them were still customers? Well, it seems like only 95% of them who came in Q1 of 2017, by Q2 of 2017, were still customers. And in Q3, 95% from the original group that came in Q1 2017 was also still customers. And you can see that it drops over time, and that is natural. The question is, how steeply is it dropping over time? And you can see that if you look then at the people who came in Q2 of 2017, so the 39 customers who came in then, 97% of them you were able to retain as a customer in Q2. In this case, it's a little bit example, but a little bit confusing with their example. But what they mean is in the second quarter after they came in. And then in the third quarter after they came in, only 82% of people from this cohort were still paying customers. So that's what this shows. And ideally, the kind of graph that you want to see is I guess if we were to kind of color code it, where green is good retention numbers and red is pretty terrible retention numbers, you will tend to see going from left to right, going from green to red. You want to stay as green as possible for as long as possible. But also over time on the vertical axis, hopefully with every subsequent new group of customers that's starting with you, such as like Q4 2018, ideally what we would want to see over time across the horizontal axis for that last row is we would want to see actually by Q2, let's say 99% of those customers were still with you. And Q3, 99% of those customers were still with you. That's the kind of graph you want to see. So generally moving from, dark green to red in this case. And on the vertical axis, as time goes on and you are getting better as a business, then you also want to see that in general, the way you retain is getting better. And certainly if there's anything confusing about that, throw that in the Q&A and we will get to that, but we will move on to other examples along these lines. So the other, I think, thing that is confusing about cohort analyses or slicing and dicing by time is that I often hear SaaS marketers kind of mix up terms, or rather not be precise enough about their terms. And sometimes I do that as well. And that means that, when people say, oh, I have 95% retention, that actually doesn't really say anything. I think what you want to understand as a business owner is, oh, I have 95% retention of users in the second quarter or second month or whatever it is? Or is it that I have 95% of the revenue dollars in the second quarter or the second month? You want to be very precise about what is being retained or being churned out here. Is it number of people, number of customers? Is it, or is it the amount that people are spending with you? Because those are two very different things. And we're gonna dig into this a bit, but I think it's really important as you kind of think through your own business with this presentation, when you slice and dice your data by time using cohort analysis, which is more important to you? Is it more important for you to track how many people are coming back? Or is it more important for you to track how much revenue is being retained? And to dig in a little bit deeper, I'll give you a couple of concrete examples. If you're running a media company, and let's say it's really important for you to get users coming back every day, the way you would do cohort analysis is probably by users or percentage of users. Like if you have 100 people coming in January, actually maybe even by cohorts by month is not precise enough. If you have 100 people coming in January 1st, on January 2nd, ideally, you want 99 of those people coming back. And then maybe by January 3rd, you want 98 of those people coming back, etc. You probably care a lot about users if you're making money off of ads and eyeballs. But if you're a SaaS company, very often people want to know, how does this break down by revenue? Because it's inevitable that your customers are going to churn after a while. But one of the interesting things, if you read some of the public filings for some SaaS companies, large enterprise SaaS companies, is you see retention numbers of 110% or 130%. Well, what are people referring to there? Your cohort starts at 100 customers. You can't go up from there. That's there's no way to increase the number of users who came in January by definition, but you can increase the dollar amounts. Like if the 100 people who came in January spent $100 with you, maybe some of those people churn, but that's okay, because maybe the people who become power users end up spending more with you because you're cross-selling other products or you're upselling products. And so for a lot of SaaS companies, doing cohort analysis by revenue is actually the more important number. Who cares, like not who cares, but you care less about how many specific people or how many specific companies churn with you, and you care a lot more about how much people are spending with you over time. So let's just kind of keep that in mind and be precise in our language as we're talking about cohort analysis. All right, next slide, please. So you can also do this exercise of cohort analysis across time based on channel. So you can create a cohort analysis like we showed in the graphs before for your specific channels. So for example, you would say, for my Google Ads, this is what my cohort analysis looks like. For my SEO, this is what my cohort analysis looks like. And you may actually find that there are interesting differences. Like you may find that people are more retained over time if they came in from some channel versus another. And that if you have enough data, let's say you're a seed stage company and you're generating, I don't know, call it $10,000 per month or more, like I think you probably start to have enough data to be able to look at that and really assess, where should I be spending my time and my energy, and doubling down in channels that are seemingly working or seemingly promising based on the customer behavior specifically from that channel over time. Next slide, please. All right, so now we are going to try to do tactical examples, and I have a blank Google spreadsheet up, and we're gonna try to work through the technical logistics to switch screens here. Should I go ahead and share my screen?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Here we go. Share. Can everyone see this blank spreadsheet?
Yeah, looks good.
All right, great. So we're gonna dig into this a little bit and actually, do cohort analysis on a fake company, essentially. And let's just say that, we've got a couple of examples. So let's say we've got like a media company. And we will have cohorts. You can slice and dice your time segments by whatever you want. So for a media company, maybe we have enough people coming in every day to be able to analyze the groups of people by day. So you can slice and dice by, let's say, day. But it wouldn't be wrong to slice and dice by week either. So this is totally up to you. I would just think about, what do you think makes sense for your business? And for many, let's say SaaS businesses, slicing and dicing by month makes a lot of sense. But for media companies, maybe slicing and dicing by day makes more sense. For e-commerce, of course, depending on how many sales you have, it could be slicing and dicing by week or whatever it is. Obviously, the bigger your company and the more data you have, you may actually segment your cohorts into smaller chunks if you start to have thousands of customers coming in every day. But in any event, what you would do is you would essentially come up with time on the left column. And then you want to understand, okay, we want to check how retained people are over time and what time periods make sense for that. Well, in this case, it could be how many people are coming in daily. So there's day 1, there's day 2, there's day 3, there's day 4, there's day 5, and you can send that out as far as you want, like how many people come in at the end of the year for this first group. And then what you want to do is say, okay, well, let's say that we had 100 people coming in on that first day. And then we check back, like for people who came in on that first day for the very first time, how many of them are coming back again on day 2? And maybe it's like 50 people. And then on day 3, this is the tricky part. It's not how many people came back on all the days. It's still just comparing to the people who came in on January 1st, how many people are coming in on day 3. So in fact, it could actually be a different subset of people. Like, let's say that it's 50. It may be a different group of 50 people than the people who came in on day 2. But this is what you would do. And then similarly, so we would carry this all out until however far you want to do your cohort analysis for. And we can talk about, how many days is useful. But on the vertical axis, we also want to look at for people who came in on January 2nd. So let's say that 60 people came in on January 2nd. What you want to do is on day 2, the next day after January 2nd, how many people came in? And maybe that number is 20. And again, on day 3, relative to January 2nd, how many people came in? So that's the exercise that you would do, and you would do that all across. Now, you might be wondering, how do I get these numbers? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you to our Google Analytics. Oh, I guess this is the wrong one. I'm going to go to our Google Analytics here. Can you see my screen? Great. So in Google Analytics, they actually do have a cohort functionality. And I would say that it's actually pretty terrible. And I'll show you why, and we can all walk through that. And so I really struggled with, what do I recommend to startups? Like, what do I even recommend to my own portfolio companies as they're thinking through this? Like, how do you actually put this spreadsheet together and get the data? And it ends up being a little bit kludgy, but I'm going to show you my kludgy method, but it's completely free, and that's why it is kludgy. You can certainly pay for much better solutions, but it will cost you more. So for example, some of our companies that are further along use Amplitude, and some of the higher end tools like that will just take care of everything for you. But if you are on a shoestring budget and you want to do everything for free, then this is how I would do it. So everybody can set up Google Analytics for free. And you'll see that we are actually looking at the Hustle Fund site. And you can see here that on the left, there are all these different tabs that you can pick. And there is a cohort analysis tab under audience. You can see it is in beta, and you'll find out why it's in beta in a second. So we're just loading our page here. And we can do the same exercise and get the data directly in Google Analytics as what I just did in spreadsheets, where you can select your cohort by the day that people were acquired. Either they came to your site or they made a purchase. You can change the cohort size as we discussed. You could do it by day, you could do it by week, you could do it by month, depending on the nature of your company. And then you can pick what you want to measure by. So like on day 2, is it how many people bought again? Is it how many people came to your site? Stuff like that. And so you can see, you can set up even goals with goal tracking in Google Analytics and that kind of thing. So, and then you can lastly pick your date range. So let's say 30 days out. Great. So you can see here, this is our data. This is actually live real data. So you can see how many people come to the Hustle Fund site. You can see that this would, running this website is probably not a good business for us. We would generate no ad revenue. But you can see here how this works. So on May 24th, there were 81 people who came in. And then the next day on May 25th, only 3 of those people came back. And then the day after that, 3 people, we don't know if it's the same 3 people, came in. And you can see it just kind of goes to 0. Like basically nobody comes back to the Hustle Fund site. Like we're just not that interesting. And then again, going down the vertical axis, if we were, let's say, a blog or something, hopefully things would get better over time where we are doing a better job retaining people like who come in June. So that's how you can do this in Google Analytics. And you might think, well, that's relatively straightforward. I just have to click on that tab on the left and make sure that I set up the filters right, and that's great. But here's the problem. The problem is the data that they can track only goes back so far. So let's say that you are a SaaS company and you want to measure by month. And let's say we want to measure by revenue. This is going to be challenging because we don't actually charge on the Hustle Fund site, but we still can only go back 3 months. So this is basically the limit to our cohort analysis here that you can do, which is for people who came in this March group, we can track how many people made a purchase, certainly in March, and then April, then May, and then June. And that's it. That's as far as the data will go. Same with April and May. So the problem is this data doesn't go back that far, so it's not very useful, especially for those of you who have been around longer than 3 months. So my recommendation to you is, this is a relatively straightforward exercise to do in Google, And what I would do is I would combine this with Google Spreadsheets if you want a free solution, and just come back to your Google Analytics and whatever numbers are in here, assuming you have it set up correctly. Then I would duplicate the work in spreadsheets, type it out, and then just manually record the numbers that you see there every month, if that's your cohort, or every day, or whatever it is. And you'll see that data will start to fall off of Google Analytics, which is why you need to record it here so that you don't lose that information. And that's how I would sort of kludge this, by basically putting the two together. And that's how you can actually do your cohort analysis. And we'll go ahead and do one more example, which is, let's say that we have a SaaS company, and I've kind of already alluded to this before, but I want to make sure that it's extra clear for people who are running SaaS businesses, which is we can do something very similar to what we did at the media company. And maybe we are tracking people by month. So who comes in January, and who comes in February, and who comes in March. And in January, the group of people who come in January, maybe they spend, as a group, they spend $1,000 with us. And this is a revenue-based example. And maybe the next month, actually, we're able to retain 100% of that revenue. It's recurring, so hopefully it should be easier to retain people than a media company. But then let's say a bunch of people don't like the product all of a sudden, we made some changes, it broke, etc., and now everybody left. And we'll see that maybe in March, people tried out the product and then everybody left here. So you can see that actually this is how you would fill it out if you were trying to do your cohort analysis by revenue. And then hopefully over time, as we add many more months here, we've fixed all the bugs, our product has gotten better, the user experience is more clear, then we may be able to retain people for longer, and the group of people who are coming in may be spending more. So, maybe several months from now, we're actually making $1 million, yay, or however much money. And people are being retained quite well. So that's what this would look like over time.
Hey, Elizabeth?
Yeah.
I'm getting a clarification question here. So I know we're doing Q&A in a moment, but can we stop and just answer one question?
Yeah.
So this person just needs a little clarification. Looking at the first example in the media company, how does day 2, row January 2nd, start with 60, when day 2, January 2nd, in the first row, when day 2 in the first row is 50? So there's I think, yeah, can you clarify it?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I realize that this can be kind of confusing. Like, I feel like my mind was warped in looking at all these for maybe a couple of years. So the way to think about this is, on the vertical axis, these are the groups of new people coming in. So I'm going to take a step away from this cohort analysis for a moment, and let's just talk about our customer. So we open up for business, and let's say that we're a blog, and the first day we bring in our friends. So, we bring in like Alfred, Aardvark, Betty, Boop, I don't know, Charlie, Cooper, whatever. We let's say we bring in 3 friends on the very first date. Then the second date, this is to our blog. The second day of running our blog, we're like, maybe we should email all of our friends. So I write an email newsletter to, 100 friends or whatever. And let's say that everybody comes in. Like, besides these first 3 people, I send out an email, and I bring in 100 friends on the second day. It's important to make the distinction that these are different groups of people. This is when people first came to our site. So in this case, our friends Alfred, Betty, and Charlie came to our site on January 1st. And we're grouping them together as one group. And then when I emailed all of my friends, like these 100 other people, we're grouping them together in a second group. Now what we want to do is we want to track their behavior over time. Did Alfred, Betty, and Charlie like our site? Do they continue reading my blog? And so what we're going to do is, I got them to come the first day, but I want to understand, did Alfred, Betty, and Charlie come the second day? Well, actually, it turns out that only Betty came. because Alfred and Charlie thought that this was a very boring site. And then the next day, Betty continues to come. She loves the content we're writing, and she continues to come back. And then maybe a few days later, all three of them come back because Alfred and Charlie really want to know what has changed. Maybe it's gotten better. They decide to check it out. So that's following an entire group of people over time. And so this is the first day. This is day one, or in Google Analytics, I think they call it day 0, but it doesn't really matter what you call it. The next day is day 2, day 3, day 4, and on that 5th day of the week, all of them come back. Now let's track how my 100 friends have done. So I sent out the email newsletter to them a day later, so they got a slightly different experience from the first 3 friends, because they were not there on day 1. And day 1, my site was down all the time. It was a bad experience, and that's why Alfred and Charlie didn't come back, and it was boring, etc. But my 100 friends, like I fixed all the bugs, or a lot of bugs that night. And so my 100 friends came in January 2nd, and so their experience was slightly different. So that's why we put them in a different group. And let's see how their experience fares over time. And it turns out that actually it was great that I fixed all those bugs, because you know, my 100 friends love it and they keep on coming back. And it isn't until, you know, day 4 when actually about 50 of them get distracted and go on vacation together. And so, you know, they don't come back or something like that. So the point here is a couple things. One is on the left axis, each of these rows represents like a different group of people. You can never be a first-time visitor or a first-time customer in multiple days, right? Almost by definition, that's not possible. You can only be a first-time customer once in your life. And then for the group of people who are first-time customers on that day or in that month, how do they fare over time on the next day or the day after that or the day after that? So hopefully that clarifies this. So going back to this, we're talking about the 100 people who came in and were customers or users for the first time here. 50 of them came back the next day. And in this case, this is a different group of 60 people, and 20 of them came back the next day. Hopefully that clarifies some things. But throw more questions in there if it doesn't, because I realize it's really confusing because you have both days this way and days that way, or months this way, months that way, like what is what?
Thank you, Elizabeth. I just checked in with the person who asked that question, and they said that it does make sense. And if he has follow-up, he'll wait for the AMA and put him in the Q&A box. Okay.
Well, I think let's go back to the slides. And I actually think that we're at the end, but oh, I'm still sharing my screen. Do I? And so we actually are at the Q&A, and this is the end of the presentation. So we can open it up to the 20 minutes remaining that we have of questions.
Great, let's do it. So right now we've got about 20. I'm seeing more come in every second. Just as a reminder, if you have a question, please drop them in the Q&A box, not the chat. The chat is really hard to monitor, whereas the Q&A is a little bit easier. Okay, let's just start at the top. How do you measure if a customer is still engaging through cohort analysis? For example, do you look at newsletter unsubscription rates, engagement with social media, something else?
So this is where it's really hard to answer that specific question because it will differ from company to company. But I think at a high level, the way I would think about it is, what is your end goal? So for subscription companies, I can almost say with confidence, your end goal is probably revenue. Maybe the same with e-commerce companies. Like hopefully the end goal is to sell. So for those folks, that's what you want to be measuring over time, revenue. Now, if you are running a media company, then I think it kind of also depends on what your goal is. Obviously, at some point you do want to make revenue, but what are the drivers for revenue? And if you are an ad-supported model, then maybe it is number of people who come back to certain pages. But if you're, let's say, an email newsletter company, you know, maybe it's number of people who convert with their email address, like signups. So it will vary a lot across the board with this audience.
Okay. And then someone is curious about a marketplace approach. So looking at a business for like who's B to B to C. So he's wondering, what are some good strategies to increase the retention of end customers who were acquired through this B to B to C approach?
Good question. So I think at a high level, I want to encourage everybody to think very simply. I was just talking with one of my business partners last night, and I feel like what makes marketing so hard is there's so many things you can track. And in B2B2C, it sounds like it's complex because you could be tracking your business partnerships, and then they lead to consumers, and they're just like so many things that you could be tracking. But at the end of the day, in that business, the only thing you really, I assume, care to track is either the number of end customers, not knowing what your business is, or the amount of money that they are spending with you. And what I would probably do is, regardless of whether it's B2B2C or just directly B2C, if you want to slice and dice by customer acquisition channel, so in this case, maybe slice and dice by the business partnership you have. If you have many of them, let's say you partner with 5 businesses and they all send you customers, you may want to do this cohort analysis on your end customer. Maybe it's how much they're spending or whatever it is for each of those 5 channels. So you would have like 5 of those graphs that we just made and see, do they differ? I would actually guess that they would, but you'll find out.
Okay, great. This question from Anthony is in regards to one of the graphs from earlier. So I'm going to actually scroll back to this graph. And his question is, okay, in this graph, it's clear that Q3 of the first year had an 88% retention. How do we discern what was the improvement that drove that uptick, as it appeared to be an anomaly and it wasn't repeated in the following quarters?
88% retention.
From for example,
yeah,
like you'll see in the 4th row, like this is a lot of green. this graph, this cohort did really well.
Yeah, a great question. And I don't think I wrapped this topic up with a bow very nicely. So I think this is perfect. So the question is, like, if you look at the group of people who became customers in Q4 2017, it looks like a lot of them were very happy and continued to be customers throughout the year and even into the first quarter of next year. In contrast to all the other people who started with us, they ended up, pittering out. And I think this is where you need to tie your cohort analysis with what is it that you are doing in the business. And this is actually, I don't actually think that very early stage startups who have no revenue should necessarily pay for these higher end tools. But the higher end tools, like once you start to get some customers and are starting to make some money, even though of course, like people are always averse to spending money, I do think some of these higher end tools are useful because they also track your analytics around changes you've made on the site, etc., and try to tie it back to what's happening in the cohort analysis. And maybe it could turn out that if this is an overall picture, maybe you spent a lot of marketing dollars in, I don't know, Snapchat that quarter and only that quarter, and that turned out to be really great for you. And you would be able to see that. Or it could be that you made a website change that quarter and then you decide to reverse it or something. And so if you can find like what are the activities you did, whether it's based on customer acquisition channel or changes you made in the product that tie with the cohorts that are doing well, then you can hone in on, actually, this was a good change. Let me try to do more of that. And that's really the goal here. Figure out what changes you're doing that lead to better retention. So thank you for asking that question, because I think that is the piece that was missing. And I think just as a side note, if you look at this cohort, it's not very clear what it is they're measuring. Like when you have percentages, is it number of customers or is it percentage of dollars? So again, be specific.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have a couple of questions asking around clarification of the Google Analytics cohort analysis free tool. Mm-hmm. So basically people are wondering, like, how can you get access to the data beyond those 3 months, or can you not? And if not, how do you sort of track that? So can you just sort of revisit that topic briefly?
Yeah. So it's funny. So either it's a very unintuitive tool and I cannot figure out how you can get more data out of it beyond 3 months, or you can only get 3 months of data. And I've done a lot of Googling on this, and nobody can seem, at least on the internet, nobody can seem to get more than 3 months of history or get that tool to track more than 3 months of history. So if you figure it out and actually you're like, Elizabeth, you're stupid, you needed to click on that button and actually you can extend out to a year, please do let me know, because that would be fantastic. But I don't actually think you can track more than 3 months of data, which is why I suggested if you do use that tool, and it is very useful up to 3 months, then just copy and paste those numbers into a spreadsheet. So that way, as time passes and you get more history and it erases the old history, then you will have the old history, if that makes sense.
That makes sense to me. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone else. A couple of questions also around tools that might be useful outside of Amplitude and the free Google Analytics cohort analysis tool. Does anything else come to mind?
No, I mean, I think there are a lot of general marketing tools that I think have cohort analysis as part of it. I haven't looked into this deeply, but I would imagine Mixpanel has a cohort analysis tool in it. Usually it's like a component of a broader set of tools, because I think, to my point earlier, the more useful thing is if you can tie changes in a cohort to a specific product change or a specific customer acquisition strategy that you did, then that is the most useful piece of information. Like, what can I do more of, or what should I do less of?
I can confirm that Mixpanel does have a cohort analysis tool, and it seems really good. Alex is wondering, what is a large enough sample size for cohort analysis?
Yeah, I think it's a fuzzy moving target. So I think this is the kind of thing where you just want to start by just recording data in the beginning. You're not going to have a whole lot of data. You're not going to have a whole lot of users or customers. Maybe only one customer comes in that first cohort, whatever. But just start tracking. And then I think, you know, this is a very wishy-washy answer, but, you know, I think the goal here is you're trying to get a sense of what to improve. You will never have a slam dunk answer. You may start to see anomalies based on, you know, product changes or customer acquisition channels you're trying, and then just follow that rabbit hole. And it may be a dud. It may just be a fluke that you made that product change and all of a sudden everybody's retained, but then the next month they're not. So you're going to be following a lot of fool's errands, but, you know, I think you just kind of follow those, and then you try to see what seems like it consistently leads to success. And that's really the goal. So hopefully that answers your question. There isn't a set number. It's just more to give you inclinations of what should you be focusing on.
Okay, here's another one. How would you grab the attention of a customer that hasn't been on the platform in months? For example, this person is running a media company and a lot of her users don't open the email marketing campaigns.
Well, so in debugging your marketing, you know, I think it's important to kind of go through all the questions of why is it? Is it that they are not getting your emails? So maybe there's a problem with your email service provider. Is it that they are getting your emails, but your subject line is bad, so they're not opening? Is it that they are opening, but then they're not clicking, so your open rate is good, but they're not clicking? So that's kind of the line of thinking that I would take to try to really hone in where is the problem. If it looks like they are not even opening to begin with, my hunch is it's probably you have a problem with your email service provider, or it's been so long since you've emailed them that they don't even remember who you are and they're not opening, or they don't care. And in which case you can change up the email service provider, but if you've tried changing up the subject line and all this other stuff to try to get people to even open, and that's not working after changing email service providers, then it may be very challenging to get them back. But I would try all those things and kind of look at each of those methodically before jumping to conclusions.
Okay. This is sort of a follow-up to that question and maybe a little bit of a repeat, but I think it's worth looking into. So Clarence is wondering if there are tools or methods that you can recommend to entrepreneurs to figure out why certain cohorts or certain timeframes aren't doing that well. Media company.
Oh, for a media company?
No, like beyond media companies.
Oh, beyond media companies. And yeah, so I think that unfortunately, you're going to have to take a lot of shots in the dark, and there are going to be a lot of hypotheses that are wrong. So I think the framework I would use is sort of like, you know, what we all learned in school, like the scientific method, like what's our hypotheses? Well, this cohort doesn't seem to be doing well. Well, why is that? Maybe they're confused. That's one hypothesis. Maybe they don't find value. And then you need to go in and do some work to try to prove or disprove that. So if they're confused, I mean, I think in the beginning, there's a lot of high touch. So I would just email your users and try to hop on a call with them. Like if you're not seeing them come back, especially if it's not a media company, so you have their information and you're trying to, let's say, sell them something, hopefully you can have a chat with them, find out, you know, why they came in the first place. Did they find success in achieving that or whatever it is? You know, ask them sort of customer development-ish questions and then try to really get a sense of like what the problem is of why they're not retained. So I think this is just sort of a tool for you to kind of hone in on, you know, maybe hunches that you might have around maybe what customer acquisition channels work or what messaging works or what is good about your product or whatever it is or why people are using this. And then you have to formulate a hypothesis, and then you have to go and prove or disprove that. And that may just be manual in reaching out to people in those groups. Okay. Especially in the beginning.
Okay, thank you. There are a number of questions around that. I'm not going to revisit this topic again. If you have a question related to this, it's a little different, feel free to throw it in the chat. There are a number of questions, Elizabeth, around like more specific metrics and how they might benefit fundraising. So the gist of these questions is basically, what number are around cohort analysis do you think that investors are looking for that would make them interested in a business that would impress them?
Yeah. Actually, I'm not going to answer this question, but I want to refer people to a blog article. I think it was from the Lenny San newsletter, which I think is actually a very good newsletter on Substack. He recently, this growth marketer named Lenny, recently wrote about retention benchmarks, and I thought it was actually quite accurate in terms of what VCs are looking at and what other companies have done, et cetera. So we'll go ahead and send that out.
Perfect. We can include that in the email to everyone with the recording of this session. Just give that a couple of days for us. Okay, great. So Alex is asking, so he says retention is a lagging indicator. What leading indicators do you suggest your portfolios look at that correlate to retention? A lot of buzzwords in there.
Leading indicators. Well, I'm not sure if this is what it's getting at. I mean, later on, especially for SaaS companies, if you have so many leads, like everyone's signing up for your product, but you're trying to figure out, like if you have one salesperson and they cannot call everybody, who should they call? I don't know if that's the question, but then this is where we kind of get into lead qualification and what makes for potentially good leads. And I think that honestly, that's probably not a problem for companies pre-Series A. Like I would actually focus more on the retention piece for companies who are pre-Series A. If you really knock that out of the park and all of a sudden you have like so much demand and you need to qualify people up front, then that's a great problem to have. And I think the gist I would say for lead qualification is just based on your past customers and the customer persona across them, or maybe the couple of customer personas across them, like, can you figure out if your leads have that? Like, do they work for a company that's size 50 to 100, that does X revenue per year in this industry and is director of marketing and has that title and all this other stuff? And you can create like a survey or a form that people have to fill out to make sure they're qualified. In fact, even Superhuman, which is not an enterprise company, does that. They have a form that you fill out when you get referred to make sure you're qualified. And in the beginning, if you didn't have an iPhone and you had an Android, they would automatically filter you out, like, sorry, this is not a good fit at this time, but we will email you when we have Android supported. Or whatever it is, like anything in there that you filled out, like, I want to solve this problem, then they would email you and say, we don't solve this problem today, but thank you.
Smart. Okay, great. So there's a number of questions here, and this might have to be the last question depending on your answer. There's a number of questions in here around upselling or additional or another product within an organization sort of product line. How do you handle cohort tracking if a customer might be signing up for another product, switching products, or just being upsold on additional product?
Yeah, great question. So I think the same applies. Actually, if I were to take back the screen from you, if we look at the revenue example here in the screen, if you were upselling, let's say that we had 10 customers in the beginning, and each customer contributed to $100. So they each spent $100 in that first month. It's a recurring revenue product. And then let's say that 9 of them drop out, but the 10th one loved your product and decided to buy the premium package, which is like $5,000 a month, then this would go up to $5,000. So it's not about the number of customers, but it's about the total spend of that group each month. So that's basically how you would do it.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. I think we're basically at time, right, Kara, for today's session?
Yeah, unfortunately. I'm sorry, everybody, who we didn't get to.
There's so much great activity, a lot of excellent questions. Thank you so much for submitting those. And sorry that we can get to all of them, but hopefully we were able to cover a lot of the big themes that we saw. So again, a huge thank you to Elizabeth, my illustrious co-founder, for walking us through this analysis, this overview of retention. We've actually found, just as a team, it's really difficult for us to find materials that we can recommend consistently on teaching founders on how to do this. So we hope that this is an asset that you can return to in the future for your companies. And thank you, of course, Kara, for the excellent moderation and for producing this event. And finally, I'd like to reserve 2 more thank yous. So the first goes to NetSuite, our awesome partner, for helping us to put on today's event. Definitely encourage you to check out some of the retention tools that they offer at netsuite.com. And finally, of course, you, the founders and operators and builders out there who have spent your morning or your evening, early morning, super late evening with us to learn about this important topic. Thank you so much for your time and being a part of this community. And we hope to see you again in a future event. So see you soon.